Hey everybody, Plushie here, and I know this is super late, and I very greatly apologize. My schedule just has been really hectic recently, but finally, right before the event ends, hopefully this video can go out, and we'll take a look at the brand new SSR Lancer, Biscione. And this has not been the most popular servant, to say the least, because of a mix of her goofy MP animation, as well as people really liking the NPC Omi-san over her. She has caught quite a bit of criticism, but personally I do think she is a sort of a sleeper pick. She is really powerful in terms of her main gimmick, which is ramping up poison, and her MP does anti-poison damage depending on how many stacks of poison the enemy has on themselves. Yes, I'm spoiling it immediately because this is important context when talking about her skill set. So yeah, let me try to make my case for the adorable Biscione and get into today's hot take video about her. Taking a look at her base stats, unfortunately her attack stat is on the low side, and this does hurt her, and we will see that be pretty significant when doing some damage calculations later on. It's not offensively bad, but not great, right? But everything else is great. 0.7% base gain per hit on 4-hit quick, 4-hit arts, and 5-hit extra attacks means that she's gonna have really good MP gains just on a baseline level, and this will help her spam her MP, which would be very important to her playstyle. She does have the premium quick DPS deck as well, with double buster, double quick 1 arts. This has always been the case since Summer Scotty, but it became even more so with Khazra Drop's release, because Khazra Drop buffs servants buster cards a lot if you're able to crit with them, and of course Summer Scotty buffs its crit damage by 100%. So when you're using a quick DPS now, if you're pairing her with like Khazra Drop plus Summer Scotty, it almost feels like she has a Merlin buffing her buster cards for 3 turns, which is quite ridiculous. It's really funny to think about how Quick relies heavily on buster cards to do card damage, but that's just how the direction of the card type has gone, right? So this is the best deck that she could possibly have. And finally, in terms of basic traits, I think the most important thing is animal characteristics. She can work with Koyan Dark. Koyan Dark has some poison shenanigans that can work with her, and everything else is just not that important in my opinion. Her first skill increases her own debuff success rate by 30% for 3 turns, as well as her critical damage by 50% for 3 turns. It also puts 1 poison on all enemies for 5 turns that deals 2,000 damage at the end of each turn, as well as toxic poison on all enemies for 5 turns as well, which amplifies poison damage by 100%, and it also reduces all targets heal by 50%, all on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is a pretty solid skill. 50% crit up as its basic effect is pretty nice. It's a sizable crit steroid, and everything else is focused on the poison aspect, which is obviously very important for a character that has an MP that scales off of poison stacks. The debuff success rate up for 3 turns, in my opinion, is super nice, because this at the very least can overcome any form of singular magic resist passive, because they don't really go beyond like 22% or something, right? So 30% is really good. With these kinds of servants, you want to land every single dot possible, so you know, having a debuff success rate up built into their kit is wonderful. 5 turns of poison straight up does allow her MP to do extra damage for longer than some other dot type servants, because many of them only gives 3 turns in terms of how long the dot does. And finally, the poison amplification does come into play, considering these type of servants also incentivize you to stack a bunch of poisons on the enemy to do super effective damage with the MP. But a good side effect of that is you also just have a lot of poison damage, and amplifying that by 100% is definitely no joke. The heal down though is kind of a joke. It doesn't really ever come into play, so I would ignore it, but the skill itself is still very good and plays very well into her entire game plan. Her second skill is a 30% quick and buster double buff for 3 turns, and she also gains 3-turn effects whenever she attacks with her cards. So whenever she attacks with her quick cards, she would put a 5-turn poison that deals 500 damage at the end of each turn on the target, before the quick card actually does damage. And whenever she attacks with her Buster card, she would generate 5 stars. And all of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. This is arguably her most important skill because this is the one skill that allows her to repeatedly put poison on the enemies. So the main gripe of this skill is obviously that it only activates on quick attacks instead of all attacks compared to someone like Count of Monte Cristo. But she does have a couple of advantages here as well. Number one being that the poison actually is applied before the cards do damage. This says quick attacks, so it also applies to her MP, and this is important because the MP now has guaranteed 1 stack of super effective when the skill is active, unlike someone like Count of Monte Cristo who puts the burn after the MP already does its damage. So she is less reliant on card RNG to put poison on the enemy in that sense. Secondly, the poisons actually last 5 turns instead of 3 turns like Count of Monte Cristo. So it's a lot more realistic for Biscione to actually get to max stacks because she has a lot more time to, keep on putting poison while having the older poisons not run out. The on attack gain star effect on her Buster cards are kind of okay. It's like a nice little bonus. And finally, the Buster and Quick double buff is a nice sort of extra effect to throw onto a skill like this. However, this is her only self buff that buffs her MP damage, which is quite unfortunate. Her MP damage does suffer because of it. So overall, I don't think it's a problem of the skill itself. It's just that her kit is quite lacking when we take out the poison part. Her third skill is a 2x 3-turn invul as well as a 30 MP battery, and it also boosts her MP generation rate by 20%, and all of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is a pretty mild skill, I have to admit, for a modern servant. Like, it's got all the things you want on a DPS. It has hard survival, it has battery, and it has MP gain boost, which obviously help her spam her MP even more, which is important for her entire game plan. But nothing flashy here at all. The battery isn't even huge. Like 30 is, in my opinion, the minimum nowadays for DPS servants. And the 2x 3-turn invul is obviously pretty nice for blocking MPs and if you have to do a little bit of soloing with her, but not the most exciting skill, unfortunately. I think they definitely could have thrown in another damage steroid here just to boost her damage a little bit more, but it is how it is. Her passives are pretty tame. Magic Resistance A is really nice to have always, just to block off annoying potential debuffs. Present Concealment and Independent Action are just nice little bonuses to Stargen and crit ups, which I don't find very significant. And Dragonkind is a really nice passive. It's kind of a mana burst plus damage cut, and mana burst is actually great for quick servants nowadays. As I mentioned earlier, they're very reliant on Buster crits to do card damage, and also the damage cut helps specifically in counter class because its effectiveness is doubled. But other than that, nothing too crazy here. And finally, Biscione's MP is a single target 5-hit quick MP that first inflicts toxic poison on the target for 5 turns. And this essentially is another poison amplification, and when you stack this with her first skill, the first MP immediately boosts poison damage by 200%, which is quite a lot. And once again, as I mentioned, this type of servant, because you want to put a bunch of poisons on the enemy to do super effective anti-poison damage, the good side effect is that you're just doing a lot of chip damage with the poisons themselves. From my personal experience using her in a min-turn comp, because I actively reset for Brave Chains, by the end of turn 2, she's already doing over 30,000 poison damage, and by turn 3 it's obviously going to be even higher if you get to use her MP again, because the amplification stacks on top of each other. So you're doing about 100k poison damage by the end of turn 3 to turn 4, which is not an insignificant amount of chip, and I do think a lot of people overlook this point on dot servants because dot has traditionally been a big meme. But of course, the main reason you're gonna be wanting to spam poison on the enemy is because this effect. The MP deals 15% extra damage per poison on the enemy target, and it caps out at 10 stacks, which is plus 150% super effective damage, or your damage basically get multiplied by 2.5. This is of course in the form of a super effective mod, which always stacks multiplicatively to other buff types. as opposed to power mods, but on the flip side, it only affects MP damage instead of, affecting card damage as well. So this is obviously the most powerful thing in her entire kit and what her entire kit is built around. And, a standard anti-trait is plus 50% extra damage. So by 3 poisons, you're already at 45% extra. So you're almost matching that number. And by 4 poisons, you are surpassing that number. So this is a very powerful universal anti-trait. And of course, it can go way higher than 4 stacks. So it gets to a ridiculous degree in terms of scaling. For some reason, they also give poison more scaling than other dot types. Because if you take a look at Locusta's MP, it also scales 15% per poison. But if you take a look at servants like Bavanshi and Count of Monte Cristo, they only gain 10% extra damage per curse and burn respectively. So maybe because poison has the least amount of good supports, but I guess that's just a single logic. Another very important part about this MP is its overcharge effect, which inflicts a 5-turn poison for 1000 damage that scales up to 5000 damage. But the scaling is not important. What's important is that this also applies before the MP does damage, just like her second skill. So with this combined with her second skill, whenever she MPs, she would put 2 poisons on the enemy target, then do the MP damage. So she would start off with 30% anti-trait on her MP, even without any card RNG. And of course, every time she used her MP later, she would put another 2 poisons on the enemy. And of course, these poisons all last for 5 turns. And this is where they really improved upon this playstyle in terms of character design, because Biscione isn't actually super card reliant in terms of putting a bunch of poisons on the enemy. As long as you're consistently using your MP back to back, you are already putting a bunch of poisons on the enemy. Now, granted, in order to get your MP back to back, you probably need at least a little bit of card RNG to get back your MP, considering she's not an arts looper, but still, this is better design in my opinion, and it also makes farming a little bit better, because traditionally these types of servants, if you want to maximize their MP damage, needs good card RNG in farming, because they need to use their cards to put the dots on the enemy and then do damage with their MP. However, with Biscione, when you combine her MP space effect, her skill 2 effect, and even her skill 1 effect, which straight up puts another stack of poison, Biscione can start at 3 stacks of poison without any card RNG, which means that it would be 145% super effective, which is only 5% off of the standard anti-trade 150%. Of course, if you pair her with other poison giver supports, she can go even higher. So it's really nice of them to sort of improve upon this archetype of servants so that it solves the issue of them traditionally being card reliant in terms of their farming. So I like this a lot. And finally, the extra bonus effect of this MP is that it will guarantee drain a bar from the enemy, which is quite nice for quick servants, because quick don't have the best access to party-wide hard survival effects against AoE MPs. So having someone like Biscione delay that turn, in my opinion, is quite nice. In terms of farming, Biscione mechanistically is definitely an improvement compared to older servants that have their MP damage skill off of dot stacks like Monte Cristo or Bavanshi, considering, as I mentioned earlier when talking about her MP, she can start out with 3 stacks of poison without relying on any card RNG. However, Biscione still has quite a bit of issues because of her innate low attack stat, as well as not having a lot of steroids that buffs her MP damage in her own kit. She only has a 30% quick up, and she doesn't even have a big battery, nor does she have any party-wide utility. So overall, she's still not going to be a wonderful single target farmer in my opinion. She's just going to be mainly fighting archers and berserkers. I don't think she's very competitive against other mainstays in terms of multi-core single targets, right? That being said though, Biscione does have 2, in my opinion, very relevant teammates that are also considered mainstays in multi-core farming. Number 1 being Lohi. Lohi has already been super relevant ever since she came out, and she only came out last Christmas, so she's definitely one of the most powerful AoEs in the game, and she just happens to be buffing quick MPs with her first skill. So Biscione's MP type lines up, but more importantly, her second skill actually casts a poison on all enemies. So Biscione paired with Lohi can actually start out with 4 stacks of poison instead of just 3 stacks, still without relying on any card RNG. So that's obviously very nice. The second partner is of course Koyan Dark, because Biscione is of the animal characteristic trait. So Koyan Dark's second skill actually gives her 30% attack up. Now, Koyan Dark predominantly buffs Buster units because her first skill only buffs Buster by 30%, and Biscione doesn't have a Buster MP, but I think the 30% attack up is sort of like the same thing, because you do still use Koyan Dark with non-animal Busters sometimes in multicore, so you're just trading the 30% Buster up for 30% attack up, which sometimes can be even better than a card type effectiveness up, depending on your other support lineup. But more importantly, Koyan Dark's third skill gives her on attack apply all 3 types of dot on the enemy. So even though this, unlike Lohi, is card RNG reliant, if you give majority of Biscione's cards poison codes, because unfortunately we only have 4 of them, so you can't even fill her deck with it, but you can just avoid one of the quick cards because the quick cards inherently already gives poison, then you have a deck of 15 cards, which out of them 5 Koyan cards and 5 Biscione cards all have the ability to give poison. So it's essentially guaranteed that you would at the very least get 1 card that can apply poison during Biscione's MP turn. So it kind of is the same as Lohi. I think both of these are really good partners for Biscione in terms of, multi-core farming. So as I said earlier, I think Biscione is not very competitive against other neutral DPSs, so I'm only going to compare her damage with current single target Lancers. And in that sphere, her damage is actually quite impressive. So here are all of her damages at 5 MP levels, as well as at different poison stacks. Now, not all of these numbers are relevant because usually you want to focus on the green highlights. 3 poisons are just all from her own kit, and 4 poisons is with either Lohi or Koyan Dark, basically guaranteed. You can obviously push it to 5 and beyond, but I would say anything above 6 is like super unrealistic. You have to specifically get 2 of her quick cards, and you also put 2 poison codes on both her quick cards. So I would focus more on the green numbers. The blue numbers of 2 poison stacks means that if you use her MP multiple times in a farming session, one of the MPs is only going to have 2 poisons from herself because she doesn't have the ability to carry over her first skill's poison. Let's take a look at her damage compared to other single target Lancers in the game of the SSR rarity. So let's start with 3 poisons because that's her baseline damage without the help of any other unit or card RNG. And it's already really impressive. It loses to Enkidu, but it matches Skahak's, and it beats out every other single target Lancer. And if you want to push to Enkidu's damage, it's like between 4 to 5 poisons. So when you pair her with someone who can give poison, getting to 5 poison is just 1 extra face card, which is not difficult at all in my opinion. Now, of course, if you compare her to these MP upgraded Lancers with anti-trait, then she's not going to be able to beat them. Like Enkidu with Threat to Humanity and Skahak with Divine or Undead, or God forbid both, are going to wipe the floor with Biscione. But, that's just kind of expected. Biscione can actually match Brynhild's damage if she gets to 6 to 7 poisons, which is not very likely, and she can actually pretty casually match Tamamo's damage if she just has 4 poisons, but that's just because Tamamo doesn't have an MP upgrade for some reason. And if you were to use her MP multiple times in one run, one of the MPs will drop down to 2 poisons, which is not that impressive. It's about on the same level as Melusine or Bima, without additional, overcharge and whatnot. So it's not the greatest. And another thing is none of these single target Lancers has any party-wide supportability either. So she is fighting on an even playing field in that aspect. In terms of challenge quest performance, I basically said all I wanted to say during her kit breakdown earlier, because her gameplay is just extremely streamlined. There isn't much nuance in my opinion. It's just straight up trying to spam as much poison as possible. Once again, it's super easy for her to spam poison. You start out with 3 stacks, and then, your next MP would add another 2, but if you're in the challenge quest, you'll probably be able to select your face cards. Let's say you get a Brave Chain on turn 1, and then you give 4 of her cards poison command codes, right? And if one of the cards happen to be quick, then you're adding, 1 poison from a non-quick card, 2 more poisons from a quick card, so you're at 6, and then your next MP, next turn would be 8 poisons, because the MP would put 2 more, right? Once again, the MP being able to put 2 poisons every time it's repeated is extremely important in helping her reach max stacks. And if you are especially willing to reset for a Brave Chain on turn 1 in some challenge quests, you'd be able to reach max stacks by the end of turn 2, and at worst you'll probably get it at turn 3, right? Because your third turn you're gonna add another 2 poison, and by then you'll probably get it at max anyways. So really, really impressive character in terms of damage, because as you can see here in this chart that I didn't list out earlier when talking about her farming, because 10 poisons is not happening during farming, it is just really, really high damage. It is competitive with the other Lancers when they're hitting anti-trade, even when they have MP upgrades, while Biscione does not. So just really, really good. She also has decent face cards, especially after the game boost effect from her 3rd skill. And, she still has hard survival once again in her 3rd skill, and a battery as well, sort of keeping her, base performance acceptable. And she's not only reliant on the poison, and she also has 50% crit up on herself and 30% buster and quick up, which is a nice mix of steroids. Definitely would prefer if she had an attack up, a different type of buff steroid as well, but I think it is quite enough. But of course, people are gonna ask to compare her to Count of Monte Cristo, because I keep on bringing him up sort of almost as a negative comparison because of how less easy it is for him to stack burns on the enemy, but there is a reason behind that, because as I mentioned all the way back at the start of the video, Biscione has low attack stats, and her base steroids in her skill set is still a little bit lacking, especially on the MP damage side, because she has 50% crit up, but that obviously doesn't help with her MP damage. So with some calculations, I basically had a conclusion regarding Monte Cristo's damage compared to Biscione, which is kind of unfortunate because Monte Cristo needs a lot less dot stacks on the enemy than Biscione to do a similar amount of damage, despite Monte Cristo's burn only actually giving him 10% super effective instead of 15% like Biscione. And Monte Cristo on paper, without any external buffs, is gonna look a lot better than Biscione. So as you can see here, this is raw damage wise. Monte Cristo needs 4 less stacks of dot than Biscione in order to do the same amount of damage neutral. One of the big advantages Biscione has is that her poison lasts for 5 turns, but if your fight ends within 3 to 4 turns, the 5-turn poison doesn't really feel that significant compared to 3-turn burns. So yeah, Monte Cristo really ridiculous here in terms of his damage. If you start to add in support such as Summer Scotty, Monte Cristo's self-steroids effectiveness are slightly watered down. So now with double Summer Scotty, then Monte Cristo on average would need 3 less dots than Biscione in order to do the same MP damage. And the best sort of scenario for Biscione in terms of comparing to Monte Cristo is going to be Khazra Drop paired with Summer Scotty, which fortunately is one of the strongest combos to boosting single target quick DPSs. So you're probably using this pair of supports as well. And when you are calculating that compared to Monte Cristo, like both of them using that comp, Monte Cristo needs 2 less stacks of dot compared to Biscione in order to do a similar amount of MP damage. So Biscione actually scales better as you sort of add more supports to your team. because Biscione herself is lacking a lot of steroids, but supports can sort of make up for it. So at the end of the day, it is pretty fair. Monte Cristo can't really stack his burn that consistently, but he doesn't need that many burns, while Biscione can stack her poisons a lot more consistently, but she does need quite a bit more poisons than Monte Cristo. In terms of their pure damage, I do think they're neck and neck, especially if you're not doing hyper specific RNG min turns. If you are, Monte Cristo is probably still better, and also in general, use Monte Cristo still has like Invo Pierce as well as the guaranteed stun on MP, clearly trumping Biscione's just guaranteed drain. But you know, I'm not trying to say she's better than him anyways. I just think he is the best sort of comparison that I can bring up to demonstrate how good she is, because Monte Cristo is pretty universally agreed to be a really powerful boss killer, and Biscione being able to be sort of compared to him side by side is a testament to how good she is as well. In conclusion, Biscione is the latest iteration of the quick single target DPS that scales your MP damage off of dot on the enemy. She has a couple of nice things in her kit that allows her dot stacking to have the best RNG out of all of them, and it also of course benefits her farming. But I wouldn't say in general her farming performance is very impressive though, considering she only has a 30 MP battery and she also doesn't have any form of party buffs. She does have really decent damage when compared to other single target lancers, even ones with MP upgrades, and she also has two very good teammates in multi-gore farming, Koyan Dark and Lohi, that can give her even more poison with basically zero RNG involved. In terms of challenge quests, her ability to ramp up her poison stacks relatively quickly and those poison stacks lingering for a whopping 5 turns both makes her one of the most potent universal anti-trait DPSs in the game. However, I do think in a neutral scenario, very often she's gonna feel like a diet counter Monte Cristo, and considering some people don't even think Monte Cristo is that worth rolling for because of his lackluster farming performance, I don't really think I can highly recommend Biscione on a general level. However, for most DPS in this game nowadays, you don't really pull just for their gameplay purpose. You pull for a character because you like them, and then you hope they are competent. And I can definitely tell you, in terms of challenge quests, Biscione is still one of the best, and in terms of farming, she is at the very least competent. Personally, I still have a lot of faith in Biscione being one of the tippy-toppest tiers of Super Recollection min-turn DPSs, so if somehow I can find a 120 that also has max class score, I'll try my best to prove my point, so look forward to that potentially. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I very much apologize for how delayed this is. This is basically a whole day after the banner already ended, and I promise you the next video would not be like this. I hope this is at least a little bit entertaining, as I like to say usually, and I'll see you guys in the next one.